What's poppin', everyone? Venomous Stare back here with the second game of the best of 7 series between Dark and Maru. Two top tier Korean pro gamers, one of them playing Zerg, one of them playing Terran. Both of them incredibly talented and beloved by the community. Dark, up here in the top right, playing Zerg, is the intellectual successor to one of the first greatest Zergs ever, I Am Nest. I am, of course, standing for Incredible Miracle, his team. What Nest really did special at the time, this was really back in 2010 when people really didn't understand what the hell was going on, is he really understood how to properly react to Terran, how to squeeze out as many drones as possible, how to scout, and I know that sounds very obvious to some, but back in the day, the Overlord was significantly slower. The maps were smaller. It was way harder to scout as Zerg against Terran. As we see, Maru, the Prince of Marines, goes for a CC first here. And this CC first play I like a lot. It's the most economic opening a Terran can do, at least with the initial build. Now, a lot of times in StarCraft 2, you sort of say like, yeah, well, CC first, the greediest thing you can do, and then there'll be some jackass in the comments. It's like, what about fast 3 CC? What I mean by this is, like, in the first minute, 30 seconds of the game, throwing down the CC first, the greediest thing you can do. Now, what's so great about CC first, from the Prince of Marines, the micro-based Korean Terran, Maru, formerly of Prime, and Jin Air Green Wings. But one of the things that you can do off of a CC first is, well, really anything. That's what's so great about CC first, is this build really is incredibly versatile and gives you the economic backing to do a variety of different builds. Economically, this is the strongest thing you can do as Terran. This is better than Reaper Expand in terms of economy and how much money you get. It's not as safe, you know. The Reaper doesn't get out as quick. It takes a little slower, but in terms of money and keeping up with the Zerg, you really are right there. So what has Dark done? He's elected to get a pretty quick third hatch. Now, this is something that I've noticed is pretty common for both Dark and Rogue, two of the best Korean Zergs at the moment. One thing that I've sort of noticed that they do, especially against Terran, and in Protoss too, not really so much against Zerg, but the mirror matchups are sort of weird, so it's almost not even worth really talking about those in a general sense. But they take a quick third. Now, one thing that I've noticed both Dark and Rogue do quite a bit is they will take this quick third, and then this is more of a Rogue thing than a Dark thing, but he'll just make a Roach Warren and freaking all in you off of like 25 drones. He'll have the third base. A lot of times he won't even make the queen. He'll use the third base as a fake, intentional deception to make his opponent think that he's macroing. And in addition to that, he will use it for larva. Roach Warren on the way here. And by the way, I haven't pre-screened these games or watched them live. I don't know what happens. Lair on the way here for Dark. He's making a ton of drones. Back in Camp Maru, of course, a wall is starting at the natural, and he's going Hellion Cyclone. Now, judging by this reactor, this is going to be 2-factory Hellion Cyclone. I expect an armory to come down here pretty quick, maybe in the wall, as +1 is incredibly good with Cyclones, and the ability to transform Hellions into Hellbats can just brutalize a Zerg. Third base on the way here for Maru as well. He's going to start to poke out here, and of course he's going into double Cyclone, double Hellion. It's very good that Dark got this Roach Warren and he's getting Roach Speed, because this is one of those builds that's very hard to hold with pure Ling. Ideally, I think that Zerg would love to just skip Roach Warren every game and try to just rely on Lings and Queens to defend, make a lot of drones, tech up quick. But there are several rushes or builds or all-ins or even openers in this game that sort of counter the pure Zergling opener. This is one of them, the 2-factory Hellion Cyclone opener. And it's interesting to me that Maru has swapped off into a quick tank here. A lot of people will stay on this double factory Cyclone action and do what's sort of called battle mech, where you really rely on the Cyclone to just fight the Zerg head on. And the Hellions might run into the main here, as this could get tricky. Where are the Roaches? I see 4 on the way, 8 on the field though. That's a bit peculiar, as they were a little out of position. Maru's going to try to kill some drones here. One of the Hellions is already low. Now Roaches are out, and like I said, the Roach opener is good against a Hellion opener, so not a too terribly high amount of damage. But we can see that Maru, because he went into this quick tank, wasn't really expecting the Hellion opener to do that much. I mean, Dark went Roach, and whenever you go Roach, you really mitigate how much damage Hellion should do. Maru's going to run out on the map again, as well as take his third. And notice that he does already have a nice little wall in with depots here. Newbie Terran players should be aiming to do this every single game. You always want wall-ins versus Zerg. The more the better. Hellions running forward here. This is a great move, as they're going to start to target down drones. Now the reason this is a great move is because after you do your initial opening gambit of Hellion harass, once all your Hellions die, Zerg is sort of expecting you to transition. Even if you go into mech, they're almost thinking like, alright, well, it's going to be like Banshees or Cyclone or like a tank push. They don't really expect, like, he's going to make 3 more quick Hellions and run them across the map. And suddenly we have a brutal 17 dead drones for our Zerg player Dark. He's at a huge worker disadvantage. Now he does have a Spire, but that's been scouted. And really, in modern day Legacy of the Void, a scouted Spire is nearly worthless. A Spire almost acts in the same way that a Dark Shrine acts, as we see some Roaches get chased away by one tank. Because the Spire is sort of like the old 250 gas Dark Shrine that Protoss had in Wings of Liberty, where it's like, okay, this is sort of like this long, tall building that leads you to a gimmick unit, and if your opponent doesn't spot it, then it works. The Muta has fallen so insanely out of favor and out of meta, probably like within the last 2 years, I would say. Like it's been like this for a very long time in Legacy of the Void. The Muta is just not a used unit. It's not a popular unit. I would argue that we even see more Broodlords, which you have to have greater Spire and Hive Tech for, than Mutas. Once you have a couple Thors, especially with +1, Mutas are useless. Terran players have really figured out how to put pressure on and devastate Zergs as they're at that very fragile stage where they're teching up to Muta. The 2-1-1 stim drop build has had a lot to do with this, as we see Dark getting an infestation pit, probably going to aim to tech up to Hive. He's getting another Evo chamber. Scan goes down in the main, he sees the Evo chamber. Now this is interesting because last game Maru, as we see a scan go down at the third, Maru is scanning the natural a lot because, as I pointed out in my last cast before I got the freaking hiccups, it's very easy and intelligent to get max saturation in your main and then just rally all your drones up to your natural and build all your shit out there. The reason Maru scanned the main, I would assume, is because he wanted to see if the greater Spire was on the way. Although, oddly enough, seeing the infestation pit is nice because you can sort of deduce that Hive is coming, even though the Hive is at the natural and he never scanned it. And he's not actually getting a quick Hive, he's going for a lot of Swarm Hosts, which is sort of weird. One of the things that I've noticed that Swarm Hosts have really fallen out of favor. I mean, they have gotten significantly less popular than they were. Really, you see Roach Hydra play versus mech, and then like a Hive rush to Viper. But after the Swarm Host's speed was nerfed and after its damage was nerfed, it's pretty bad. You sort of have these absurdly slow units that walk around, and it's really hilarious whenever you sort of all these locusts fall near a mech army, and if they have any tanks at all, they just disappear. And you're sort of in the situation where you build a lot of Swarm Hosts and you shoot them all at the Terran. You've spent all your money on Swarm Hosts, you have an insane amount, and you shoot them all at the Terran, and instead of killing all the mech units like they did in the past, they just sort of die because they don't do damage, and because the Swarm Host is so much slower, your margin of error is just really cut down to nothing, and Swarm Hosts has become way, way worse. They are good against like unsieged small little forces like this though. No Hellbats. Whenever you have a few Hellbats to tank the Swarm Host and deal the splash damage, because they'll always land in a bunch a bunched pattern. It's really strong. So this is the ideal sort of mech army you want to fight with Locust, is no Hellbats at all, just, you know, no a Hellbat free sort of fight me with moneyed units army. And again, Maru's going to push forward, and this is such a measly army with no Hellbats that he's just going to be repelled by Locusts again. And he's going to scan ahead to see what he can find. Still no Hive. This is a little bit concerning for me, and he does need to transfer some workers here. Once you see 14 of 8, that means the minerals have been depleted and you need to transfer. We see here Roaches are actually going to attack Marine King's force. Marine King, Maru. If you don't know who Marine King is, he was a player back in the day who played very similar to Maru. Lots of drop-based, heavy bioaggression, although oddly we see Maru going for mech here. It's only odd when brought up in comparison to Marine King. I jokingly pointed out that as we see a huge Zerg flank here, another very small force by Maru will be cleaned up. I jokingly pointed out that Maru was sort of like a Marine King that could play mech and scout, as both Marine King and Maru are known for their inspirational marine splitting micro, drop play, aggressive tendencies, but Maru is definitely the more complete player. MKP being more of sort of like a, I would say, fan favorite, spark plug, a guy who relied on a lot of flashy micro to get the job done. Maru is an overall more well-rounded player. As you see, he doesn't want to lose the CC, he's just going to lift and run the SCVs, and the Locusts aren't really going to be able to do very much at all. Little fight going on here as more Locusts start to fight, and those are Hellions, not Hellbats, so they die so quick. But all the Locusts die, and again we see, for whatever reason, Maru is trying to fight here without tanks. And whenever you face off against Swarm Host and a Zerg who is pretty much going for like a Roach Swarm Host composition, you like to go for Banshees, you like to go for Liberators, you like to go for tanks. What you don't want to do is what Maru's doing, which is consistently fight with like sub 50 supply forces of mostly Cyclone Hellion. You want a few Hellbats at the front, but you really want your moneyed tanks, your moneyed Banshees. And Maru does lift this. This will be easily deflected. He loses a few workers for his trouble, but it won't really be a big deal. He's on so many CCs, orbitals, mind you, not planetaries. This guy can mule anything. Banshees are so good at dealing with mid and early game Zerg units. They pretty much just decimate what Zerg can make early. They're the hard counter to Roaches. They're really good against Swarm Host. And Dark has made quite a bit of mutas here to try to counteract the Banshees. As if you ever make Corruptors against Banshees, you will find yourself just running around all game, because if the Terran player gets Banshee speed, it will be very rough for you. Maru really late turrets here, as with the PF here, this was a little sloppy because a couple of turrets would have really held this base well, but as it stands, he's in a very precarious position where the mutas have gotten a foothold, and he can't really fight like he wants to. He's using mules to repair. I think he will be able to hold this off eventually, but a little bit earlier turret and those mutas just fly in and do nothing at all, because the Swarm Host attack was completely predicated on the mutas working. A Banshee gets attacked there, but Maru's looking to move out, and again with no tanks, I don't think Dark is going to mind this. Dark is almost maxed. Maru's at around 155 supply. And whenever you're at a significant supply disadvantage and you move out without tanks with mech, Zerg is sort of saying like, oh baby, keep coming. Because where it really gets hard as Zerg is whenever you go tank heavy. Really, even with just like 3 or 4 tanks, engaging the Terran mech army becomes a completely different animal than if there are no tanks involved. Maru making Thors, Hellions, Ravens, Banshees. Not a lot of tanks though. As Dark is pretty much trying to use the Swarm Host as soon as they come off cooldown, which it's always interesting. With Swarm Host, you're sort of in this weird position where especially if you're going a ton of Swarm Host, we can see Dark here really just made probably like a dozen or so, yeah, 15, and then he went for a real army behind it. As we see mutas over here at a turretless base, And it's probably going to get a kill, because even though the Thor has +3, the mutas have +1, and the building was almost dead before the Thor got there. This is like I said earlier, a lot of Zergs sort of go for a Roach, Hydra, Viper. Well, that's true, but at the same time, this isn't really the old style per se. This is like, I'm going to go Roach, I'm going to go Bane, I'm going to go Muta, and I'm going to have some Swarm Host to harass. The old style was more of like I'm going to go Mass Swarm Host to counter your mech units and then tech quickly into Hive. But the Mass Swarm Host is really the backbone of the comp. We can see the way Dark is using Swarm Host here is more like, I made 15 Swarm Hosts to harass your peripheral bases, and then I'm going to fly around with mutas and harass you as well. The Terran mech army is famous for being very strong when it's all together, but losing power when it's apart. And the Cyclones are going to try to mow down the Overseers there, and they do. Now that's nice because there are Cloak Banshees on the field. But this base is safe. If I was Maru, I would put probably 4 or 5 turrets around that area behind the mineral line, because if a Zerg harasses you with mutas in one spot, he's very likely to come back again. As he's going to another location, Seeker Missiles come out, and the mutas are pretty much going to be cleaned up here. They killed some workers, but Dark is out of mutas, and what does he make? Makes Hydras. He's getting +3 attack for range and melee. He's getting Adrenal Glands, +2 Flying Carapace, Hydra range, and Hydra speed. More Swarm Hosts coming out here, and tanks finally coming out. They go off on the Banes initially, so they sort of missed their first big opportunity. And remember, Maru's down by 20 supply, but he's pushing forward here and looking very good in this fight. And he's on a huge economy. Let's just pull up income, even though the Zerg player, of course, has more workers. If we look at the bases, my goodness. And Dark tries to do some Roach counter harass, but Maru picks off a middle base. The Prince of Marines here even brings back 4 Banshees to deal with Roaches. I love this. And again, Dark's in this position where, well, once the tanks are made, how is he going to engage? Now, thankfully for him, it's not a max Terran army, and a lot of the army is sort of back at home defending. So that means he will be able to push it back with as much stuff as he has. And Maru sort of clicks on the rocks there at the last second to try to trap the Zerg army, but he was surrounded, unfortunately, and he is still down in supply. 22 workers fall for the Prince of Marines, as this base was being heavily harassed, and a ton of workers have died, as Dark has killed almost pretty much like a game's worth of workers. 72. If you think about the average StarCraft game, if you get 72 workers, you're doing really well. Dark's killed that many workers from Maru. Usually it's the other way around, quite frankly. Terran's running around with Blue Flame Hellions, constantly killing Zerg's workers. But at this point, Maru's pushing again. He sieges some tanks. And I know it sounds like I'm sort of beating a dead horse and belaboring this point, but how many times have we seen Maru move out with like a complete scary mech army? Not many. How many times have we sort of seen these weird poultry forces that are these, 30 supply, 20 supply move outs that don't really have an adequate number of tanks or Banshees? Not only has he been at a supply disadvantage for a long time, but he's moving out with half of his shit. And he doesn't have many tanks here, and the Locusts thought about turning back. They're going to go on to the tanks. And do they get a tank? Abby. The Locusts suddenly, their armor debuffed. They are, the Swarm Hosts I should say, their armor debuffed. They are Locustless. And Dark GG's. Maru plays a beautiful mech game there. I'm going to rewind it a little. So one of the most important things to note about Maru's play is all the bases. Even though Dark was running around trying to kill workers, Maru just had so much economy. Notice these far off bases are planetaries, but he didn't make all of them planetaries. Like you watch a player like Ruff play, it's like, okay, his third's going to be a planetary, his fourth's going to be a planetary. No. Maru had a ton of orbitals, a ton of scans, a ton of mules. It was just these outer bases he made planetaries. And when the Zerg player did a big counterattack mid-map, he brought his Banshees back. He didn't panic. He didn't bring everything back. You know, really, what Dark wanted was for Maru just to shit his pants, be really scared and bring everything back. Delay the whole push by multiple minutes and be in a good position. But instead, Maru saw it was Roach. He brought his Banshee back. And this is sort of the bread and butter of Terran that you should be going for as far as early game interaction with Zerg and Roaches, is you say, okay, that's a lot of Roaches and I've gone for Banshee. Not only have I gone for Banshee, but I've gone for multiple starports that can really make Banshees. So like if I bring my Banshees back to defend the Roaches, 4 Banshees can defend like infinity Roaches, especially once you get Banshee speed and upgrade. And that's what Maru did. He said, look at this, look how easy this is. I'm just going to bring all my Banshees back. I'm going to defend your Roach counter, keep everything at the front door, and then Dark's in this position where Maru just brought back the units that were important. So I think Dark was sort of expecting Maru to bring back a lot of stuff, and then he could easily crush the forward push. But because Maru only brought back a few Banshees, Dark was in this position where he wasn't able to kill the ground army. And I love that. Notice how Maru was running around harassing bases. Maru has more bases than Dark. If you were doing this as Terran against Zerg, you're probably almost always going to win, because Zerg has to be mining more than Terran. It's just the way the race works. Anyway, that was the game. Sub for more.